Ephesians 4:29 tells us, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. Over the weekend, I took a break from Facebook to reflect on the state of our country, to watch without speaking what was being said on Facebook, what was happening in the media. And there was no good news, but there were lots of conflicting statements, reports, and comments on Facebook. I consider myself a pretty well-read guy. I love doing research, and I follow Ronald Reagan's advice to trust but verify. That's gotten me into some trouble. There are people in this world, there are certainly people in my circle of Facebook friends who are offended by the truth. I even had a friend tell me that he felt belittled when people found out that what he was saying on Facebook was false and misleading. My gut tells me that if he stopped putting out false and misleading comments on Facebook, he wouldn't feel so belittled. But I get that people say and do things based on emotions, sometimes while setting aside reality, facts, and truth. Today I break my silence. I return to Facebook and I return to social media. Ephesians 4:25 tells us, therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are all members one of another. That's so true. It's so true, and I'm going to try and live by that. So I want to speak some truths today. Just a few weeks ago, we had a small private funeral for David Davidson. David was intellectually challenged and lived over 70 years old with the mindset of a 5-year-old. David lived in a nursing home where he received good care, but his family was prevented from visiting him because of the COVID-19 virus. David was alone. His family was told it was too unsafe for them to visit. David, with the mindset of a 5-year-old, died alone. Tens of thousands of families across the United States have sat helpless as their loved ones passed away alone. In Louisiana, Pastor Tony Spell was arrested for holding church services in violation of the quarantine. In Tampa, Florida, Pastor Rodney Howard Brown was also arrested for violating similar quarantine orders. But throughout the protests and riots, how many arrests have we seen of protesters for violating the quarantine? It's interesting to note that the same amendment to the Constitution, the First Amendment, that allows for peaceful assembly, also allows for the practice of one's own religion. So in one case, we saw pastors arrested for assembly, but we see protesters unfettered by the reality of the law or the quarantine. But over the past week, we've also seen mayors, governors, and politicians in Washington, D.C. marching with protesters over the death of George Floyd, hand in hand, arm in arm, with zero regard for social distancing. Most of them wore no mask. This is a picture of North Carolina's Governor Roy Cooper practicing, or maybe not so, social distancing while protesting the death of George Floyd. I want to be very clear that the death of George Floyd was tragic, and I understand the outrage. I'm outraged too. But I don't understand the assertions that his death was racial. There's no evidence of that. But there's ample evidence that his death was wrong, unjustified, and very tragic. When I was in my early 20s, I lived in Washington, D.C., and my friends and I were all huge Washington Redskins fans. We watched it every week. And as we approached the playoffs, hundreds, if not thousands, and maybe hundreds of thousands of people around the country would jump on the Redskins bandwagon. And we often joked about that. But I want to be clear on this. That's what we're seeing today in the aftermath of George Floyd's death by a large number of people, some of you. On May 31st of this year, in the span of 24 hours, 18 black lives, men, women, and children, were murdered in one day. It was the deadliest day in Chicago in 60 years. Very little's been said about that. And I don't see very many people in my circle on Facebook talking about it either. But that was a very violent day, and 18 Americans lost their lives. I've seen an incredible number of people making sometimes hard to understand accusations about the death of George Floyd. We're absolutely justified in our outrage over his death, without question. We all should be outraged. But we should also be outraged for the 18 black lives of men, women, and children that were murdered on May 31st. In the 2 weeks since May 31st, 28 more black lives have been ended in the city of Chicago. This all adds up to 257 murders in the first 5 months of 2020. 257 homicides. This is a map of Chicago. Each dot represents one of those 257 murders. You can't even see the outlines of the city of Chicago because of the sheer mass number of murders. This comes from the Chicago Sun-Times, and this is updated daily as people are murdered. It's a horrible graphic to look at. The actual website that lists the names and ages of all of those murdered is equally horrific to look at. But how can we as people be outraged by George Floyd's death and be silent on the other 257 murders? How can we do that? We need to do better, and we need to be outraged at all senseless murders, not just the ones that are cherry-picked by the media.